Okay, so we just returned from another break, and now we're going to talk about the main event. It starts off with Sean Mooney interviewing Davey Boy Smith, and Sean Mooney asks Davey Boy about the pressures on the family that this match has caused, and Davey Boy says he didn't make the match, Jack Tunney did. Um, and Bulldog says when he's going to wrestle Bret, he's going to pretend he's never met him. And then Mean Gene interviews Bret, and Bret has actually says he takes offense to Bulldog saying he's going to pretend he never met him. Bret says he wouldn't that Dave Boy wouldn't be in a WWF if it wasn't for him. And then Bret blames Davey Boy for causing family tension. And then Sean Mooney interviews Diana Hart, who is Davey Boy's wife and Bret Hart's sister. She says she's worried about them hurting each other and that the family means more to her than the Intercontinental title and things like that. So it just, again, she plays her part in building up the effect it's having on her and her family, which is quite good. And then British Bulldog comes to the ring accompanied by Lennox Lewis. Do you remember Lennox Lewis's career as a boxer?
Oh yeah, yeah. That's one of the things I saw when I was looking it up. I remember Lennox Lewis coming out as.
Mm. Yeah, I think this is just before things start working out for him. Really, like there were a few hurdles along the way, but this he had his match against Razor Ruddock, and he knocked him out really quickly. It's a very impressive showing. They actually announced this match is coming up in the future, and then later on, obviously, eventually, he takes the title off Evander Holyfield. So yeah, his moments of destiny were still to come, really.
Yeah, obviously, it was yeah, it was a good. The match was good, wasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I think you could argue this was the best match of the night. I mean, I'm speaking for myself actually. Was this your favorite match of the night?
It probably was because of obviously because of all the connections, like family connections and British connection, and and otherwise, if it wasn't for that, obviously it would be Warrior and Randy Savage would have been the main event, obviously. But
Exactly.
because I was looking back at it after I listened to Bret Hart speaking about that match. After I was watching it, and I could see at one point he was Bulldog looked like he was in another planet. Yeah, he was shaking his head like he's all confused. Yeah,
What Bret Hart has said afterwards in his book and things like that is that Davey Boy Smith was in a bad place mentally and physically going into that match, and that he'd actually got high the night before and wasn't really in a good state to wrestle. He's forgotten the match they'd agreed upon.
it's like you said about Hulk against who they were fighting, like
Hmm.
the ones who know what they're doing. It's
Hmm.
lucky that they. It's lucky that Bret Hart was very very expert wrestler, so he knew exactly how to make it look like he's like yeah he managed to no he did some good stuff at the end. I think I think for the last 30 I think for a little bit he did okay, but I think you could tell his face was you could tell he was all confused looking. Yeah.
But to be fair, we wouldn't have seen that so much, would we, from our vantage point, as we were up in the gods. But
Yeah, but now I mean now I've rewatched it and stuff.
yeah,
Yeah, as you said, doing sleeper holds and all that kind of thing is quite good because it you can actually whisper he can whisper into his ear to remind him to do things if he forgets. Yeah,
exactly.
obviously, yeah, because now even now you've sometimes if you're lucky, sometimes you occasionally hear someone whispering something. You know they're whispering what to do. Yeah, it was a good match. Besides the emotional fit thing, I think obviously Savage versus Warrior would have been the main event in my eyes, but because it was in England and it's
Mhm.
Bulldogs, it
Well,
had
I
to.
think I think if SummerSlam hadn't been at Wembley Stadium, we would have got a Shawn Michaels Bret Hart ladder match. That's what was rumored to be the match that would have happened if it had been in Washington, um, and that would have been probably the first ladder match. But yeah, it ended up being Bulldog versus Bret Hart, and then a couple of months later, Shawn beats Bulldog for the title there. Then Bulldog gets released.
And obviously, I know he came back in later days, but it
Mhm.
wasn't the same anymore, was it?
I disagree. I think all right. Maybe he wasn't. Actually, no, I do disagree because he was involved in world title matches, wasn't he? He didn't win the title, but he was a challenger for Shawn Michaels' world title, so he was featured in some prominent spots. But yeah, this is a good match despite Daveyboy Smith not being in the best state. I mean, you say he was a little bit worse from wear from the night before, but he wasn't as bad as Hawk was. Like Hawk was actually intoxicated coming into the match. I think Davey Boy Smith wasn't intoxicated when he was wrestling, but he was in such a bad state from his previous indulgences. He was sober, but he just wasn't in a good mental state to remember what had been agreed. So that's why Bret Hart led him in the match.
Yeah, he was more. Yeah, he wasn't as bad as Hulk, but he was just a bit. Probably lost the
Mm,
storyline in his head a bit. The
yeah.
story.
Davey Boy pins Brett. So basically, Brett goes for a sunset flip, but Davey Boy holds on to the legs and then pins him, and that's how he wins the title. So Brett puts Davey Boy over. Davey Boy is the hero of the hour in terms of storyline, but then a couple of months later, as we say, Davey Boy's gone, and then Brett goes on to become the world champion. So obviously, Brett did himself a lot of favors with this match. They must have seen how he carried the match, how he made Davey Boy look good, and as a result, they rewarded him with the world title.
Yeah, and also I remember as Bret Hart was going to go out the ring, all the fans were saying, "Just go in and shake his hand." And
Mm,
you saw a picture of you saw Diana saying, you could lip read what she was saying. She said, "Just shake his hand,"
mm,
and then they shook hands, and then she came into the ring, and then they to be fair, the way they're so tired that Bret Hart looked like he looked all obviously purely because of all the work he did, because he had to do extra. He had to work for two sometimes, didn't he?
mm.
And
But also, Bret Hart was very annoyed about that spot at the end where he goes away, looking like he's annoyed that he comes back and makes up with Davey Boy. He felt Davey ruined that spot because I think Davey was playing to the crowd when he should have been trying to sort of encourage Brett to shake his hand. So Brett was annoyed with Davey about that he didn't actually do what he was supposed to do in that instance.
yeah,
Um, but I, but I think Brett was being a bit too harsh, really, a bit too overcritical because I think it came across well. I think the crowd were still really into it, weren't they? And they were booing Brett when he wasn't shaking David Boy's hand when he was walking away as a bad sportsman. So then he has a change of heart. He comes back and he does endorse Davey, doesn't he?
yeah, but you can tell from the reaction of Bret Hart, he was genuinely not happy, not only in the storyline but generally not happy, and it must have been horrible for the wife, for his wife and Bret's sister. Yeah,
Yeah, but that's all storyline, isn't it? I mean, that they're all working together behind the scenes, so it is purely kayfabe.